Over the next couple of modules, Module 7 and Module 8, we are going to be discussing ways that we can disseminate our findings. What are appropriate areas that we can show or display our research? Here we are at week 7 or Module 7, and good news. We are near the completion. We've done that problem and purpose. We've done our lit review. Our methods are done. We've done those results and reported our findings in Chapter 4. And finally, we've made it to our discussion and conclusion in Chapter 5. So, with these 5 chapters, what areas of these chapters should we think about when we're considering where we can disseminate our findings? For some of us, it may be our purpose or problem statement. For others, it may come because we did a specific method. Others, we may have found a specific result. And finally, for other research, it may have been that we've been able to come to a certain conclusion in our 5th chapter. So really, it's going to be dependent upon each individual project as to how you as the researcher want to potentially disseminate your findings and where those findings will be disseminated. Let's first begin with talking about conference presentations. Conferences are a way at which we can disseminate our findings and talk about our research. As you'll see in Table 6.1 in your text, there are numerous options as to places that hold academic conferences, as well as potentially professional conferences. In addition, some of those conferences may be in convenient locations. If you live in a major city, it may be that by chance there's a conference going on in your city or a nearby location. Sometimes it's even fun to be able to travel to a unique setting in order to be able to present at a conference. Some of the positive opportunities that a conference presentation presents is there's often immediate and diverse feedback. Conferences are attended by both practitioners and academics, and those practitioners and academics can offer immediate feedback to a presentation. With that then, conference presentation allows the researcher the opportunity to shore up and even strengthen the project more following a conference presentation. Sometimes it's nice just to be able to get that feedback and bounce ideas off other academics and or practitioners at a conference setting. Our next potential area at which scholarly research can be disseminated is academic journals. Table 6.2 in your text gives reference to a number of academic journals that are relevant in the sport management discipline. As I talked about in slide 2, depending upon a number of things, such as the question or problem statement, the methods, the results, or the application and discussion, may help lend itself more towards one of those specific journals listed in Table 6.2. I want to talk a bit further about how a journal article is accepted. First of all, it needs to be discussed that when submitting to journals, it's rather competitive. Research needs to be refined and in a proper state. In addition, each journal often has its own criteria and manuscript requirements. We'll talk about those a little more in the next slide. As I've said, some journals may cater to a specific topic. Therefore, you should think about if your topic aligns more closely with a specific journal. And finally, each journal typically has its own preference on references. For the most part in our discipline, you're going to find that our journals require APA references. However, it's important to make sure that you check the journal requirements when you're thinking about those references. I want to spend some time talking about what a typical manuscript structure looks like. As I've mentioned previously, it will be dependent heavily upon the specifics of each journal. However, scholarly peer-reviewed journals typically require or follow what is the following structure. Title, obviously self-explanatory, the abstract, lit review, methods, results, and discussion. For the most part, you'll see our project aligns well with this structure. We, however, haven't talked much about the abstract. That abstract is a brief, bare bones synopsis of what the research intends to do. Obviously, then it moves on to the lit review, the methods, the results, and discussion. I do want to point out that manuscript structures have stringent requirements in regards to word count and or page numbers. Some journals may require a certain type of methods. Some of them may require other specific pieces. It's super important when considering publication or submission to a journal that you closely follow the outline structure designated in each journal. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the peer review process. I have not yet mentioned, but for the most part, when we're talking about scholarly journals, they are what we call peer-reviewed journals. That is, in order for the article to be accepted to the journal, it has to have been passed through a number of reviewers that are considered experts in the field, and those reviewers will have deemed the research appropriate and worthy of the journal. So let's talk then a little bit more about this peer review process. How does this happen? So if we have decided that we want to submit our research to the Journal of Sports Sociology, we will submit our manuscript to that journal. It goes to a blind copy, and what does that mean? It means that typically all of our names are removed from the manuscript, and that manuscript then goes to a group of reviewers. So the reviewers, in theory, have no idea who wrote the journal article submission. Then, judges are to review the quality of the manuscript as well as its sustainability in the publication. That is, if we refer back to our example of the Journal of Sports Sociology, the experts in the field or those journal editors will review the quality of the manuscript, but they also want to determine whether the manuscript falls in line with the journal, the goals and values of it. In addition, I want to mention that dependent upon the strength of the journal, there will be varied acceptance rates. Those more popular, more respected journals obviously will have a lower acceptance rate. It's harder to get your article published in those journals. Other, maybe smaller, less reputable journals may have a higher acceptance rate. Okay, so what does this process look like? Once that manuscript has gone to the reviewers and it's judged, there are 4 things that can happen. The reviewers of that manuscript can simply accept it. And that means that they are willing to take the manuscript as is and publish it in the journal. Clearly, that's a positive. The next is what's called acceptance with revisions. This is where the reviewers believe they want the manuscript in the journal and they are going to accept it, but they ask the researcher to clean up or change a few things. And again, it is an acceptance. The third option is called revise and resubmit. The reviewers of the manuscript determine that there are revisions that need to be done. And in doing so, they may typically ask the researcher then to resubmit once those revisions have been done, and they will determine again whether it is available for acceptance. And lastly, on a negative, there is just a flat rejection. I would say that for the most part, those rejections come when the journal editors believe the topic just does not fit the said journal. For the most part, what we find in academia as well as in these peer-reviewed journals, there is typically a push for that revise and resubmit rather than a straight rejection. Yes, as I've mentioned prior, this process is really competitive. And feedback can be difficult, but nonetheless, feedback is usually positive in that it gives the opportunity to go through the process again. I've spent the last several slides talking about ways at which we can disseminate our research. I want to implore you that good research should be shared. As we've talked about prior, it can be shared at conferences. We're going to spend a little more detail in just a second, in Module 8, I should say, talking about conferences. And secondly, we also can share our research in publications. It's more competitive, it's more difficult, but it still yields rewarding results. Good research, I also want to note, does not happen in a vacuum. While feedback may not be easy, we need feedback nonetheless. I understand it can be hard to receive. However, feedback ultimately helps us produce and refine good research. And lastly, in some ways I want to say, what's the point in doing research if we can't share it? Good research should be shared.